All right. So I've got David Forrestall, our CEO, founder at SecurIT360 with me, and we are diving into the Verizon DBIR, which stands for what?
Data
Data
breach
breach and investigation report.
report. Yep.
Okay. um, so let's dive in. One of the biggest takeaways I've heard is around the number one uh, uh, attack vector. So let's start there. What do you think are the biggest signal that security leaders should take away from this year's DBIR?
Well, the rise of vulnerability exploitation, and one thing, some other things to think about too is I always like to qualify this. Anytime we're talking about a report that's got statistics, which these things are good. Don't get me wrong. Um, you have to remember what the population sample is, the data, the time frames of the data set as well, and their point of view, because you're going to have the CrowdStrike reports, you're going to have Google puts out reports, but you have to look at what the data set is. But the reason Verizon is so well respected is because they pull from so many different sources, and it's not just here's all the things that we see coming across our interface. If I own, you know, if I have thousands of sensors deployed and we see these things come across our interface, okay, yeah, that happens. Uh, but these are actual breaches that were investigated where there was forensic evidence and they were able to say, and sometimes inconclusively, this is what it looks like was initial access. This is the type of malware that was used. This was a phishing. So the fact that it comes from thousands of breaches. There was 31,000 incidents, I believe, and 22,000 actually confirmed breaches in this data set. It's just the most comprehensive. It, the fact that we have deeper evidence, not just something lit up my sensor, and therefore there's X% of this, that, or the other. That's why this is so well respected. But I believe that the rise of the vulnerability exploitation. This is the first time it has overtaken credential misuse or credential theft. Is because of AI, and it's because of it's closing the gap between the vulnerability exposure and the time it takes to write an exploit. Because now we've got these coding engines, the bad guys and the good guys too, where as soon as a vulnerability is released, even if we don't have something like Claude Mythos, so just to be clear, Mythos doesn't accelerate this per se, because Mythos is actually analyzing available source code. So just because a vulnerability is released doesn't mean that you have access to the source code. It just means like this piece of software, this version has got a vulnerability, and once it's released, you have a few details about what type of vulnerability it is. So the threat actors now already, and this has been going on for years before AI anyway. There is a site called the 0 day clock, and the 0 day clock shows how long from release of a vulnerability until there's an active exploit available. And the data set we're looking at right now ends in November of 2025. And so for 2025, the TTE for an available exploit was 21 days. And already in 2026, since this data set, even though the Verizon report was just released, we're already down to 1.6 days with 52 confirmed exploits in 2026 at an average of 1.6 days. So that is AI. So another really interesting thing too is one of the things that I like to look at whenever we look at the Verizon report, and again, the data set is fast moving as ransomware and other things are, and the different tools and techniques that they use is, well, okay, this data set ends in November. That's 7 months ago. What has been happening for the last 7 months? Well, basically, if you look at across all the various articles and the things that are going on, there's a continuation of what Verizon has published. So there's an acceleration and continuation of the trends that they've shown. So we're not missing anything. There's nothing bright and shiny and new. It's just the the acceleration of the things that they've already seen. For example, going from 21 days to 1.6 days in the last 12 months of a time to exploit from when a vulnerability is announced. So that, I believe, contributes to this new number one initial access of vulnerability exploitation, because now these tools are in the hands where they can get to this faster. But what do we do? Do we throw our hands up and say, oh no, here comes AI to get us? No. These are what you're going to see with some of the analysis. Here I am giving my own analysis of the report, and I've already looked at some of the others, is everybody's gravitating towards the sensational type of things. But there's also some very boring and mundane comments in the Verizon report where the analysts are 100% right. The basics are now more important than ever. So again, we've got this speed and volume coming at us with all this new technology with AI, but we're not saying that all of the our protections and the things that we've been doing for years are no longer valid. No, we're saying they're more important than ever, and it's more important now to do those right and make sure that they're done right, because we know that they're coming after us, harder and heavier than they have been.
Yeah. I mean, so I feel like you kind of already answered this a little bit, but do you feel like the report confirms this idea we've been talking about with AI? It's an operational speed thing. Everything's accelerating. Is that the main problem rather than tooling or skills? It's the speed.
Yeah, it's the speed. They're also, I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but you're not actually seeing new and unique attacks generated by the presence of AI. What you're seeing, and again, what does AI do? The artificial intelligence, it actually mimics humans, so it's learning from us. So the techniques, nothing caused us to create some new threat vector or new attack or something that we can't map to MITRE. All of these attacks map to other attack patterns that we've seen in the past. And this vulnerability exploitation, again, it being top, all it is doing the same thing that humans used to do, the bad guys have been doing for years, but now they can just do the same thing faster. So that's what we're looking at, is just an accelerating arms race.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned earlier too, there's a lot of boring stuff in there. Like, what are some of the boring stuff, but not meaningful? Because I think we run into that a lot in security. The boring stuff is kind of overlooked for the sensational. AI is coming for us. What's the boring stuff that we need to know about?
Well, it should be no surprise to anyone that humans are involved in 62% of all of the breaches. So here we are. We still have the people with their fingers touching the devices or the keyboards or clicking, and or misconfiguring something, erroneously, letting somebody in or leaving a door open, or accidentally, letting data leave the company. One of the interesting things, even though it's not quite as boring, but there's 67%. Some of the studies show that 67% of corporate users are using AI and LLMs in work with a non-corporate account. And so there's the opportunity. So here comes some of the boring stuff. Information governance. Isn't that exciting? Put your stuff where it's supposed to go, and don't take it and put data in places where it shouldn't go, and be careful about it. And then also too, this is a struggle for all companies, is if I have an information worker that has access to sensitive information or internal information, how do I know that they have to have access to it? How do I know that they're using it in the way that's intended, it's being stored in the place that it's intended, and that it is not being put into an LLM where our intellectual property or somebody else's private information could be exposed? So there's some of the old-fashioned boring stuff. We've still got people doing the things, and contributing to the to the breach. And we're back to that, training people, accountability, managing our networks well, and as far as access controls, watching our information and making sure that we've got least privilege and that it's stored in the proper places, and we can even monitor it. And so it's again, and if you'll go deeper into the report, they map some of the threat vectors or attacks into the CIS controls, and says, well, this is, here we are, the CIS controls, very well known. These are the things that you need to do to defend or protect yourself against this particular vector.
Yeah. So it sounds a little bit like what we've been talking about too, about a return to the basics for the security controls and whatnot. Do you feel like, yeah, and honestly, I'm a little bit surprised by the shift to vulnerability exploitation, just because it seems like to me, the big use case for AI has been social engineering, and that has gotten a lot easier with AI. Does it surprise you?
Well, so again, back, if we're going to talk about basics and we're going to talk about vulnerability exploitation, vulnerability management has been one of the top struggles for tech teams for years. And especially now that we have more and more technology, AI or not, the number of applications running on every desktop, the number of SaaS applications, web connected applications, third-party applications that we're using has proliferated. So part of that vulnerability exploitation includes third-party applications that were that had vulnerabilities exposed. And so what you're seeing is the team struggling to keep up with the patching. And there's also some information in there that shows the lag from the time of announcement to the time that the vulnerability is removed. And especially for third parties, you could still have, I forget the exact number, but I want to say it's like 30% of some of the tracked vulnerabilities were still available 90 days after they knew. So here you are connected to, and those statistics may not be right. I mean, there were so many numbers in that report, but but still, you have a large percentage, a relatively large percentage of a known vulnerability in a third-party application that you use that's been sitting there for 90 days, and you can't do anything about it. I mean, you have to wait on that vendor to close that hole. Some of it can be poor access controls around MFA, where they figured out a way to get around that. And then that vendor, it takes them months to rewrite their application or add some additional security into the application. Because here's the problem: they've got thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people using the application, and they can't just quickly go change something, which, especially something as sensitive as an authentication scheme, access control as well, that could potentially lock everybody out now. So nobody can use it. So they have to test, they've got to build it, they've got to test it, they've got to roll it out and make sure that their software is still useful. So that's the vulnerability management is still, has been and will continue to be a struggle. And then now, because we have more SaaS connected applications than we ever have, we're still dependent upon them to fix their application. And sometimes writing a patch is just not, it's not something that they can do quickly.
Yeah. So then from an enterprise perspective, what if you are a business that has this reliance on a third-party application that has some major vulnerability discovered, and it's going to take a month, 2 months, 3 months, however long it takes, what do you do? Do you stop using the tool? Do you figure out something else on your end that you could do to cover some gaps security-wise?
So, I mean, this is where, again, talk about some boring stuff. I mean, there's plenty of interesting things in the report, but third-party risk management is not an exciting topic either. Who do we, first of all, how do we keep up with all of our various, tools that we're using in a decent sized enterprise? We work with a decent sized global organization that they've got 4,000 vendors in their database, and if we're looking at third-party risk, not all of those are necessarily technical vendors, but a huge portion are. So then we have to look at that population and say, which ones could be ones that that could cause us the biggest harm, or if there was something wrong with their software that could, expose data, allow somebody in. You look at the various risk factors, but talk about some of the boring stuff is keeping up with all that. When they do have a risk, do we know it? How are we tracking that this application that we use now has a critical risk? And then how quickly can we do a risk assessment on what would the impact of that be if that's exploited? And doing that in a relatively short amount of time, because we've got 1.6 days till the exploit's available, give or take on average. So now, if we're waiting on them, is there a workaround? Can we patch it? Can we somehow put some guardrails around it? Or could we at least monitor that particular application to see if we're seeing activity around an exploit, around a known vulnerability? So you have to do that across all of your applications, and you have to keep up with that to say, would we know? Do we have the right processes in place? Are we subscribed to the right alerts? Does our vendor proactively alert us? How would we know through a monitoring, whether it comes out as a CVE or what have you? How would we know that this maps to us and that we have an actual risk, and that we can either, if we can't prevent it, can we at least monitor it? And based on the risk assessment, it could be nobody can use this application until the patch is available. But we don't see that often. Most times there are workarounds, or there's increased monitoring. And if it's bad enough, the organization, the third party, or the vendor will be able to do something around it. It's not just going to sit there wide open without anybody touching it, depending upon the criticality.
Okay. So, excuse me. When we're talking about this increase in speed that attackers can weaponize these vulnerabilities within hours now instead of weeks or months, does that mean that is monitoring the big solution then? Everybody can monitor, right? So
yep.
Is that like the thing is that all we got?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, and it is one of the critical controls is if we don't know what normal is, how would we know what abnormal is? So having those baselines on your systems of user behavior, and now is it user or is it agent behavior? Now that I have an agent, I can do things really fast. So is that really me or is that my agent? But would we be able to know that normal is here, something spiked? Should we look at it? Could be good, could be bad. Could be day-to-day, just day-to-day traffic or behavior. But until we go and look at it, we don't know. So having that 24/7 monitoring, which is, it's pretty commonplace. I would say there's very few enterprise organizations that don't have some type of 24/7 monitoring. But back to your point of depending upon the application and where it sits, can we even get the telemetry to, if it's a SaaS application and it only provides a certain amount of logging, and maybe they have their own internal engines to send you alerts, but you can't really tie it into your SIM or your tooling. How would how much information do we have that could even tell us whether there's an anomaly? But yes, monitoring is critical. And then it's not just the monitoring, though. It goes back to all these basics. Have we implemented least privilege? Are we following zero trust principles? Where we can, if we can't implement it fully. Do we have privilege access management? Do we have the strong backups? Do we do all the things So that way, even if we can't monitor, or if our monitoring can't catch up to the current threat just yet, because it will, are these other safeguards in place where we would actually, reduce the blast radius, reduce the impact of something happening.
So today, are defenders realistically capable of operating at the same speed, the speed of AI, the AI speed right now?
Well, again, we're still looking at, for the large portion of attacks, are still attacks that we've seen before. The tools, the TTPs, the vectors they're coming. We're not seeing like these magic brand new ones that we've never heard of. We're seeing more of the same, a lot more of the same. So we should know how to defend against that. So even if the volume is up, and we've already done a really good job building our security program, and we know that we have, a layered controls in place. We know we've got good monitoring. We know we've got good endpoint protections. Even if we have this increased volume and speed of attacks, it's still the same attack. It's just more of the same. So if we blocked it one time, or we detected it one time, we can detect it 100 or 1,000 times, or we can block it 100 or 1,000 times, because it's the same attack. Now, where it's an increased burden on the team is, especially with the social engineering and the sophistication with that, is if they're more capable now, and they are, to send a targeted email in that is more contextually accurate to try to trick a user. So now we have all these humans and potentially agents parsing through these better phishing emails that's going to cause a higher burden on your security teams on defending against these, or actually seeing whether is this a legit email, or is it a false positive. They're most likely, they're not going to be sending just direct malware in that you can easily detect and block. There's going to be a nefarious element in there, or something that looks legitimate that you're trying to trick the user into doing. So now you've got to deal with a much higher volume of those. So that's going to be an increased load on the team. But again, it's still phishing. It's still, with good email controls, we're going to be looking for, any, we're going to be scanning attachments. We're going to be suspicious of links. Our security software should be inspecting links where we can. And we're going to be training our users. So again, if we've stopped it or defended against it before, we can still continue to. There's just more of it.
Yeah. Well, I think the bigger question that we're kind of circling around is these AI tools, these LLMs, are they fundamentally favoring the attackers more so than defenders today? Like, are their jobs easier?
I would say, yeah, I guess the fun answer, it depends. But I would say that, yeah, a powerful tool in the hands of an attacker definitely gives them an advantage, because of any powerful tool, whether it's an LLM or not, because they don't follow the rules. So they don't care about the rules. Defenders, we still have to follow the rules. So the LLM in their hands, and especially if they're using one on the dark web that doesn't have the guardrails to write malware and what have you, they can ask it anything they want. We as defenders are limited on what we can use legitimate LLMs for, but we still have them to. We can now put agents in our SOC, and we can train them to do a lot of the level 1 stuff, so we can respond to some of these threats at speed. But yeah, it's an arms race. The attackers get ahead for a while. They find other ways in. We catch up. So we're constantly after them. Reacting to them. Sometimes we do have the opportunity to foresee some of the potential threats and head them off, but they're going to try to find another way in every time. And again, they don't they're not worried about laws and 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 other things, ethics that we have to worry about as defenders.
Yeah. So in our conversations so far, we've had a lot about how AI is changing things, but it's also like it's a lot of the same. I'm curious from your perspective now with these new, I mean, things change every week, as we know.
Mhm.
Are organizations underestimating how much AI is already changing uh, offensive or defensive cyber operations?
Um, there's still a lot of hype. So I think it's very hard for especially a business leader, and even some of the IT leaders that, if I'm an IT leader, I mean, my job is not to stay up with the most current AI everything. I mean, I might have people in my organization that are helping me with that, which is hard to do anyway. Um, but my job is to provide services that support the business mission and what we're trying to accomplish. And by the way, I've got to keep up with all that stuff as well. So we've got everybody, and God love all the marketers, but um, we've got everybody running and clamoring to. We're now AI enabled. We're now, we've got AI built into our tool, and it's great. And I will tell you right now, as some of our AI modernization efforts within our organization to try to stay ahead, um, we found that the tools aren't quite there yet. They advertise, yes, let's do a proof of concept. We're going to show you how this thing is going to, save you 80% of your level one time. And our team puts it in, runs it for 30, 60 days, and we're like, it doesn't really work. So, so there's still a lot of hype around it and what's possible. However, it's definitely making a difference in everything we do. For if we, like our offensive security team, if they need to write their own exploit, if they need to analyze or decode some other application to try to find another vulnerability, they can do that very quickly now, and pivot. And also too, we're seeing efficiencies with our team with some of the more repetitive tasks on the front end that the offensive team has to do before they really get into the meat of their penetration test. So we're getting, in the same amount of time, we're giving a more thorough test than we were before. And on the defensive side, we're now offloading very repetitive and certain tasks. For example, we get an alert in that could be a false positive, or it may or may not. We don't know. We have a certain procedure to investigate every one, some of which goes out and does additional research and pulls in, could deposit a file into VirusTotal or do something else like that. We can now automate all that with AI, and so our defenders are starting their or starting or you know getting into the research to get a response to our client with much more information. It's much more enriched at the beginning, and then we can look at it and say, yes, this is something that we need to respond to, or let me, thank you, Mr. Agent, for giving me this, but let me do a deeper dive. The analysis wasn't quite what we wanted it to be, and but we're going to be able to do it that much faster.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about this some more. We're going to dive more into it next time we talk about different impacts in different industries and whatnot. As far as where we leave this conversation today, any findings that you want to bring up that we haven't talked about that you think are really important?
We've been talking so much about AI that I think ransomware has it's taken a back seat. I mean, it's the thing that everybody's worried about. It's the worst case scenario to come in and have your computers locked up, or to know that a threat actor has been in and taken your sensitive data or your customer data and going to expose it. So I think those are a couple things that we definitely don't want that to be lost in the AI shuffle here. So ransomware is still prevalent and increasing. We don't want ransomware to get lost in the shuffle. It's still bad. We still don't want it. It's prevalent and growing, continues to grow. The good news is that the statistics show that almost 70% are not paying the ransom, which means we're doing a better job in our organizations to defend against it, or reduce the impact of the actual hit, so that we've got the safeguards in place to survive it. So that's good news. And then more good news about it too, if you want to call it, is when the criminals are getting paid, they're getting less. So they're
That's
still
good
making
news.
money. They're still out there, and they will be. I mean, if they can make anything, but it's not going away. And again, if you can defend for ransomware, whether it's actually the first extortion, the first party or locking of the systems, the second extortion, which would be the exfil of data, and possibly a third extortion to where we're going to tell your clients we got in, et cetera. But if you can build a plan that defends against all of those worst case scenarios, you can defend against most anything.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you brought the ransomware component aspect up, because you're right. We talk so much about AI.
Mm-hmm.
That seems pretty significant, that 70% stat
Mm-hmm.
you threw out there. So
Yeah.
should dive into that more next time too.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll talk again next time.
Okay. Goodbye. Thanks for doing it.